Hello there and Happy New Year. Today I wanted to taste a wine that I found that I thought would interest people because I recently published some shorts looking at the old Corbans Winery and the art centre that's now there, and I found some Corbans white label Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc. I thought it would be a good opportunity to take a look at that and talk perhaps about the brand behind it. Now, Corbans were a winery based in the Auckland area, more towards the north of New Zealand's North Island. It was founded by Acid Abraham Corban back in 1902, and the date 1902 is proudly on the label there. This isn't actually a vintage wine, but it has the foundation date of Corbans on it. And Corban was an immigrant to New Zealand from the Lebanon. So in 1902, he purchased 4 hectares of land in an area called Henderson, which is a town just to the northwest of Auckland. These days counts more as a suburb. He paid £320 for the vineyard and named it Mt Lebanon Vineyard. The original varieties he planted, some of them might be considered unusual today. One of them was Black Hamburg or Muscat Hamburg, Chasselas, a variety very commonly seen these days in Switzerland and as Gutedel in parts of southern Germany. He also planted Hermitage, Syrah and Cabernet Sauvignon. And to be fair, these were grapes that were probably being used for making predominantly fortified wines, not necessarily table wines. He released his first vintage in 1908, and by 1916 his son Wadier took over as winemaker. Now, by the 1920s, Corbans were New Zealand's largest wine producer, with the winery growing up alongside the Corbans Homestead on the Mt Lebanon property. Now, the homestead was built in 1923. It still sits at the centre of what is the winery complex. And this complex was the headquarters of Corbans Wines until the late 1970s, when the Corbans family sold all their shares in the company. In 1992, Waitakere District Council, the local authority, acquired the empty site, and in 2002 they established the Corban Estate Art Centre there, providing studios for artists to work and also gallery space for them to display in. And the homestead houses the Art Centre's administration, contains galleries, and also downstairs underneath there's a cafe that you can visit. Now, Acid Corban's 5 sons continued planting and developing vineyards in and around Henderson and further out into West Auckland up until 1963, when they founded the Corban Wine Company. And for New Zealand, this was a hugely innovative company. For instance, they produced New Zealand's first commercial Muller-Thurgau, Pinotage and Chardonnay, and they pioneered a number of new winemaking developments. They were the first people to use cultured yeasts. They were the first people to use temperature-controlled stainless steel fermentation, and they were the first people to use stainless steel presses. And the company expanded over the years through the purchase of other wine companies, and it went on to experience a number of changes of ownership. Now, for them to expand, the Corbans had listed the company. As a result, in 1970, the Rothmans Corporation gained a controlling stake in the company with 78% of the shares. Now, Rothmans quite comprehensively asset stripped Corbans, selling it on just 2 years later to DB Breweries, and they sold off all the vineyards that the Corban family had painstakingly established in the West Auckland area. Now, the company was taken over in 2000 by Montana Wines. Montana were themselves at that stage owned by Seagram, so when Seagram was sold and split up, Corbans along with Montana went to Allied Domecq. That was in 2001, and then in 2005 Allied Domecq sold these companies to Pernod Ricard. Now, the current owners of the Corban brand, Lion, acquired it in 2011 along with a number of Pernod Ricard's other New Zealand wine brands, such as Lindauer, for instance. Now, Lion are a major alcohol and beverages corporation, and that company was created in 2009 by the merger of Lion Nathan and the Japanese brewers Kirin. The company changed its name to Lion in 2011 when it was entirely acquired by the Japanese, and so dropped the name Nathan from its title. At the same time, however, the vineyard and winery assets that went along with the Corbans brand weren't actually purchased by Lion. They were bought by Indevin, who are New Zealand's largest wine producer. And they continue to make the wines for Lion, and therefore, while the grapes are grown from fruit grown in Marlborough, they have to be because it says it on the label, those vineyards aren't specified, and they're not actually owned by the company that owns the Corbans brand. I can't find any information from the producer about how this wine is made. In fact, when I went to the Lion website, there wasn't even currently a reference for Corbans. But given the fact that this was priced at an entry level, I think we can presume it's almost certainly made from machine harvested fruit, that it will have been fermented with cultured yeasts, it will have been cool fermented in stainless steel tanks to try and capture the delicate fruit aromas. I think we can be pretty certain that malolactic conversion will have been blocked to ensure the wine retains as much of its freshness as possible, and also to make sure there are no additional flavours overlaying the aromatics. And I think we can also be certain that the wine was bottled young to preserve its freshness. There won't have been any need to age it for any period. And although the wine doesn't bear a vintage on its label, I think it's probably safe to presume that it's likely to be from the 2025 vintage. So actually a really good vintage for Marlborough. I think it's reasonable to assume that the wine has likely been made at Indevin's 15 Valleys Winery, which sort of nestles up against the foothills of the Wither Hills, overlooking Cloudy Bay's winery, in fact. So right in the heart of Marlborough's Sauvignon Blanc producing area. And this is Indevin's largest winery. And I think it's fair to mention that given the fact the wine is made by a company like Indevin, we can be sure it's been made by an internationally experienced winemaking team, supported by a highly qualified team of lab technicians and cellar workers. So a wine produced by world-class talent being tailored to the requirements of the brand owner, and all within a best-in-class winemaking infrastructure. Certainly there's bespoke winery software behind the whole of this, potentially giving absolute visibility and traceability, if they wish to show that to the world, for both the wine's production and for its following supply chain. Compliance processes and detailed records therefore underpin all production methodologies and result in the brand having top-level quality assurance. Now, I would just like to say as an aside at this stage that actually the Corbans wines for a period back in the mid-2000s were actually Chilean wines bottled with the same label. Obviously it didn't say Marlborough on there. You would probably have seen produce of Chile in smaller writing, maybe on the back label. And specifically this happened post-2005 when the brand was in the possession of Pernod Ricard and before it was sold to the current owners, Lion. And this move was part of a commercial strategy to make entry-level wines at accessible prices. And I think this happened especially at times when there was pressure on grape supply in New Zealand, where harvest volumes can be quite variable. The point being that this being a brand that is primarily sold domestically enabled them to maintain volumes of New Zealand wine to go into export brands. I think this is a situation that seems unlikely to reoccur, especially when you realise that Indevin back in 2016 purchased 600 hectares of vineyards in the Waihope Valley. These were vineyards already planted predominantly with Sauvignon Blanc, but also Pinot Noir, called the Bankhouse Estate. And along with that went another 900 hectares of unplanted land. So that in itself should be sufficient to ensure Indevin have good grape supply on into the next decade anyway. But also consider that they purchased Villa Maria, including all their vineyard land, and presumably also the contracts that they had for grape supply in Marlborough. All that should mean that the brand should have a good underlying supply of Marlborough fruit on into the future. I think also I should probably say this seems to be primarily a domestic New Zealand brand, although I do see some listings for it outside New Zealand, but only within Oceania. Now, in many ways, this wine doesn't sit comfortably within the sort of wine tasting review format that I normally present. It is just a brand. It's not made on any of the vineyards that the Corban family planted in and around Henderson and in West Auckland. It's made from Sauvignon Blanc, which actually is a variety that was introduced when Joe Corban, one of the brothers, sold Sauvignon Blanc vines to the Spence brothers of Mt Lebanon in the early 70s. But I'm not aware of any history of the Corban family actually making Sauvignon Blanc in Marlborough. Neither the variety or the region had really taken off before the stage where the Corbans had pulled away from the wine company that bore their name. Now, some of the vines from which the fruit comes that this wine is made from may well have been sold to the vignerons who planted them by Corbans Viticulture, a company that, although owned by members of the family, was not actually part of Corbans Wines. As I say, the wine seems likely to have been made with cultured yeasts in temperature-controlled stainless steel tanks to have been made using stainless steel presses, making full use of many of the innovations that Corbans introduced to New Zealand's wine industry. And thus I actually think it's a shame that this a non-vintage, price-fighting varietal Sauvignon Blanc isn't really a fitting tribute for all that the Corban family contributed to New Zealand's wine industry. However, given all that I've said about Indevin and their technical expertise, there's no reason why this can't be a good wine that represents some great value for money. So let's have a taste, shall we, and see what we make of it. First thing to say is, looking at it, it's pale, it's not quite water white, it's a greenish yellow colour, and I don't think that's just because I'm looking through it at green trees. I think that is the colour there. I'm swirling it, it's sort of slowly forming some delicate tears there. The wine is listed as having 13% alcohol. I'm not expecting this to be a heavyweight wine. It shouldn't be sweet. There shouldn't be any richness as a result of alcohol. So it should be relatively light-bodied. So let's see what we make of the aromas, shall we? Okay, well, the aromas are promising. They're pungent. They're on the green end of the spectrum for Sauvignon Blanc. There are certainly notes of nettles, cut grass, capsicum, perhaps even a touch of gooseberry. But then sitting behind that, there are some delicate tropical notes. There's just a hint of passion fruit, maybe even some other slightly richer notes, such as guava, heading up towards mango. So far so good. Let's have a taste. The wine has good crispness. There's a sort of a lemony crispness. There's also a mineral note to the acidity. It's fresh, it's slightly tart, it's making my mouth water. Those green fruit notes are there. Even the citric notes are not just lemon, but they're lemon and lime. The grassy notes are leading on into notes of gooseberry that are sort of opening up to show some delicate passion fruit notes. Towards the finish, there seems to be another stab of that quite mineral acidity. There are some grassy notes, perhaps even a touch of blackcurrant leaf. And that's giving pungency, and it's giving quite a reasonable length. As far as the weight of the wine is concerned, it's light to medium bodied. There isn't a lot of roundness or richness to it. It's much more lean, and as I say, has quite a nice length. This is a relatively simple, straightforward Sauvignon Blanc. As I say, slightly to the green end of the fruit spectrum, but it's actually delivering all the sorts of flavours that I'm looking for from a Sauvignon Blanc. And it's giving reasonable length. One thing that does impress me is that there isn't an obvious impression of sugar here to try and balance the tartness of the acidity. Rather, they seem happy to have left this relatively dry and allow the acidity to give a long, lean finish. I think, given its price, this is a nicely made, straightforward Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc. I will of course leave a link in the notes below to the Wine Searcher website so you can see how much it costs and if it's available in a market near you. So yes, I actually think this is quite a well-made wine. I just think it's a shame that the brand owners don't have slightly more ambition for a brand they own, whose name means so much to New Zealand's wine industry. So thank you so much for watching. I do hope you've enjoyed the tasting. If you have, do please press the like button. I'd really appreciate that. If you'd like to watch more of these videos, it would be great if you'd subscribe to my YouTube channel, and also that way you can sign up for an alert to be notified every time I publish a new tasting, and that way you won't miss any. If you have any friends you think might like to watch the tasting, I'd be most obliged if you'd pass it on to them. That would be a great endorsement from you. And if you have any comments you'd like to make, do please pop them in the comments box below. I'd love to know what you think about the wines I'm looking at, the tastings I'm doing, or anything else that relates to that. So thank you once again for watching. Please let me wish you all the best for 2026, and I do hope that you'll manage to make some time and come and join me for another video tasting in the very near future. Till then, bye for now.